Oh, I'm close. Hey guys, how are you doing? It is 7:30, so it's about time to get started. Hey, it looks like I got several people watching. That's cool. The chat window is open. I will do my best tonight to monitor the chat and get all your questions answered. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to, I got different things. I don't need all this garbage on here. Sorry, going to clean up my window just a little bit. So what we're going to do tonight is we are going to prepare for the test tomorrow. We're going to review period 3, which is 1754 all the way to 1800. I don't think it will take super long, no more than an hour, I would think, unless you guys have a lot of questions and stuff, and unless I just get talking way too much. But unless there's any questions, nothing's been popped up. Now let me warn you real quickly. There is a little bit of a lag when I'm talking and when it's coming out. It's probably about a 10-second lag. So if you type a question in, I might not see it right away, or I might answer it and you don't realize it. So just bear with me dealing with that. But we're going to go ahead and get going. Andres, I hope you're doing well. It's good to see you. And all right, so let me go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint that I want to start with, just to start reviewing. Again, I'm just doing an overview of everything. I'm not going to get real far in depth of stuff, just stuff that I think you should need to know for the exam tomorrow, and that's where we'll go for them. All right, so like I said, period 3, 1754 to 1800. Now, this really starts with the Albany Plan of Union. The Albany Plan of Union, if you remember correctly, was a plan to try to organize the colonies as a unified, not a unified nation, but a unified, military strength. The Albany Plan of Union was introduced by Benjamin Franklin, and the idea was they wanted to bring the colonies together in defense of themselves against the French and the Native Americans. The idea was, England's kind of left us alone, so we're going to go with this, and we don't know that England's going to give us the defense we need, so why don't we defend ourselves? The problem with the Albany Plan of Union, as far as many of the colonies was concerned, was that they were asking for a tax from each of the colonies to be basically put in a big pot that would help pay for a colonial militia. And the majority of the colonies said, no, we don't want our tax dollars going to a colonial militia. We'd rather it go to our own colony. So this idea of the Albany Plan just kind of fell apart. But what was important about the Albany Plan is it's going to plant the seeds for what's coming. It's not going to be for another 20 years before the Declaration of Independence is going to be written. But the talk of coming together at least started prior to the French-Indian War. Now, when we get into the French-Indian War, that's going to start in 1754. This is the fourth of the imperial wars that are going to be fought over here in North America. If you remember correctly, there was a war going on between France and England, and these were these colonial wars as part of the Second 100 Years' War. And so some of those imperial wars had been fought here already. We saw King William's War and Queen Anne's War and King George's War all fought here. So the colonists, when they started talking about the Albany Plan of Union, they weren't just saying, hey, maybe the French might invade us one day. They'd already been dealing with French, aggression towards the colonial regions. And so that idea of the bringing them together was, I think, well-founded. And I think Benjamin Franklin had a great idea. But though it didn't pass, we still move forward. And in 1754, you are going to see the beginning of the French-Indian War. And our good buddy, George Washington, is actually credited with starting that war. Now, when George Washington was 22 years old, think about it, he was only 22 years old, and he's going to be tasked with going out into the western frontier by the governor of Virginia to build a fort at the meeting of two major rivers. You don't need to know the rivers. One was the Allegheny. The other one, it starts with an M. I can't remember. But he was supposed to go and build this fort and defend it. Well, he gets out there and builds the fort. He actually just gets trapped in there. The French just eat him alive, and he is going to lose Fort Necessity. And that's kind of going to be the official start of the French-Indian War. This war is also known as the 7 Years' War. It actually is considered a 9-year war because it went from 1754 to 1763. But in Europe, they refer to it as the 7 Years' War. So you see those names interchanged quite often. The 7 Years' War, the French-Indian War. Really, you don't need to know much about the actual war itself, just no battles or anything. What you need to know is it was fought over primarily the Ohio River Valley, that area west of the Allegheny Mountains, in present-day Ohio, in that area right there. That's where a lot of the fighting was. Most of the Native Americans are going to ally themselves with the French, although there are a few that will ally themselves with the British. Probably the largest confederacy, the Iroquois Confederacy, kind of goes back and forth. They don't necessarily commit to one side or the other. What they do is they say, who's going to give me the best deal? And that's what they look for. But in the end, the English do win, and their victory is going to resort in hang on just a second, guys. This is going to resort in the Treaty of Paris of 1763. Treaty of Paris 1763, our first Treaty of Paris, is going to actually set up what's going to become the movement towards the American Revolution. Had the French-Indian War never been fought, we probably wouldn't have actually gotten to independence anytime soon, because America or colonists were happy being part of the British Empire. But the Treaty of Paris of 1763 is signed, and England gets all the land west of the Appalachian Mountains going all the way to the Mississippi River. Now, the colonists are tickled pink because they're like, man, we just fought in that war, and now we get to expand all this land west and everything like that. This is awesome for us. However, that's not what happened. Because though the Treaty of Paris was negotiated between England and France and the colonies, one major group was left out, and that's going to be the Native Americans. And they're not going to be too happy about that. And they're definitely not going to be happy about the fact that the English colonists are starting to move further and further west. This is going to spur Pontiac's rebellion. Pontiac was an Ottawa chief. He is going to build a small confederacy, and they're going to have a coordinated attack against English settlements and English forts in that same Ohio River Valley. When that happens, the English government says, we cannot protect this entire area. We cannot protect the colonists who move out into this entire area. So what they did was they passed the Proclamation Act of 1763. And the Proclamation Act basically said, this is the line that we're going to draw. It actually went along the northern ridge of the Appalachian Mountains. And they basically told the colonists, you cannot move west of that line. And they told the Native Americans, we're not going to let anybody come west of this line. So this is basically now your land. We're going to keep our forts out here, but you don't have to worry. We're not going to allow expansion into this area. And so that's going to put us on the road to revolution, because the colonists are not happy about this at all. They want to be able to move west. Now, if it was just the Proclamation Act of 1763, they could have gotten over it. It would have been like, okay, we can't move, but we still have plenty of land, so, we can get over this. But it wasn't just that. The fact is that following the French-Indian War, England saw its debt rise substantially, and most of that money had been spent fighting over here in North America. So the English government determined, man, we spent all that money fighting over in North America. Now we have to keep more troops over there to defend all this new land that we have and defend the colonists from, Native American uprisings and stuff like that. They need to start footing more of the bill. And so that's when they start taxing the colonies to help pay off the debt and to help pay off the maintenance of the military who is staying there in the colonies. And this is when we start rolling downhill and things start getting worse and worse. First tax that's going to be passed is going to be the Sugar Act in 1764. 1760s, I should point out, I always refer to that as the age of protest. You're going to have the taxes passed, and the colonists are going to protest the taxes. It's going to be the 1770s when the blood starts to run. But let's look at some of the things that are going on. Like I already mentioned, Pontiac's War and the Proclamation line. But then we're going to go into the taxation. 1764, you're going to see the Sugar Act. You're also going to see the Currency Act. 1765, though, is the big one. 1765 is the passage of the Stamp Act. And the Stamp Act is going to be get more of a reaction from the colonists because this is a direct tax. When you looked at the Sugar Act, I mean, that was just a continuation of the Molasses Act. So that was a tax that had been in place since the 1730s, and they actually lowered the tax. But that was just a tax charged to the merchants. But the Stamp Act, this is going to be charged directly to the colonist. And that's going to be a tax on any official paperwork that's printed within the colonies. And what's going to happen is if you have a document, or if you have playing cards, if you have a newspaper, you have to pay the tax on that. And the way they know you paid the tax is they affix a stamp to that tax. Don't think stamp like postage stamp. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a notary stamp where they emboss a seal on the paper and it has got like the raised ridges and stuff. That's the kind of stamp we're looking at. When that happens, that's when you're going to see groups like the Sons of Liberty and the Daughters of Liberty starting to rise up and protest this taxation. And this is when the verbiage, no taxation without representation, comes up. Because the colonists are going to argue throughout that they do not have a voice in Parliament. And because they don't have a voice in Parliament, they are being taxed without their consent. And they believe that the government needs their consent to make these decisions. Now, Parliament, on the other hand, is going to make the argument, yes, you are represented. We just call it virtual representation. Because when we take the oath in Parliament, we agree to act in the best interest of all English citizens, whether they're here in England or in our colonies abroad. Well, that's not going to be good enough for the colonists. They're like, because you don't hear our voice over there. Either give us representation or take away the tax. And so that's going to be when you start to see, boycotts coming, the Sons of Liberty and, some of their actions, including terrorizing the tax collectors and calling for them to resign and stuff like that, and the tarring and the feathering and all that stuff. They also put together the Stamp Act Congress. And the whole purpose of the Stamp Act Congress is to, for the first time, list their grievances against the king and against Parliament for the actions they're taking in the colonies. Well, what's going to happen, honestly, in 1766 is the Stamp Act is going to be repealed. So the boycotts, the protesting, all of that worked. And the English crown pulled back on the stamp tax, or the Stamp Act. But they did pass another law. Playing cards, yeah. Let me see. They stamp playing cards. It would be the whole deck of the card. Or Afrin, what they would tax when you're asking about the playing cards, they're not going to stamp the whole card. But it's going to have a small stamp affixed to it. And it would be the whole deck. So it's not going to be a stamp on every single card. Oh, is that what, I hope that's what you were asking. So, if not, just put another comment in there. So when the Stamp Act is repealed, Parliament passes another act. They pass the Declaratory Act. And the Declaratory Act basically is where Parliament says, yeah, we're repealing the Stamp Act, but we still have the right to pass any law that we want over the colonies because we are the law over the colonies. So don't think because we pulled this one back that, we're going to relinquish our legal rights or our ruling rights over the colonies. So then when that happens, then we have a little bit of time, it's a little quiet, but then the Townshend Acts are going to be passed. And when the Townshend Acts are passed, that's going to be a series of taxes. It's a tax on tea, it's a tax on lead, on paper, on paint, and paint, and glass, and glass. So it's a tax on those 5 items. Again, another direct tax. And what's going to happen is Sons of Liberty, come back out. Daughters of Liberty, come back out. Start protesting, start threatening, start, tarring and feathering. The women, the Daughters of Liberty, they arranged the boycott. Stop buying all British goods, because if we stop buying British goods, that's going to hurt them over there. This is when they're also creating the homespun fabric. We're not going to buy anything that's made in Great Britain. That'll show them. And it actually works, because in this case, the Townshend Acts are going to be repealed, but not because so much of the protests, but because of what the merchants are saying over in England. That boycott is working, because they're saying, hey, they're telling Parliament, we're losing all this money because of these taxes you have over in the colonies, and they're not buying our finished goods. And if you remember correctly, the colonies were set up under a system of mercantilism. It's a two-way street. Raw materials go to England and Europe, and finished goods come back. Well, the finished goods are not being purchased by the colonists, and that's hurting the English merchants. So they call for an end of the Townshend Acts. The Townshend Acts are going to be repealed, all with the exception of the tea tax. The tea tax remains, and that's going to remain all the way into the 1770s. Now, the Townshend Acts were passed in 1767. They're going to be repealed about a year or so later. You never hear anything about the tea tax. And this is important, because we hear over and over again that the colonists were protesting the tax on tea. And while they protested that as it was a part of the Townshend Acts, they never protested the actual tea tax. And we're going to see here in just a minute what the Boston Tea Party was about. It wasn't about the tax, guys. So we'll get to that here in just a minute. But with the end of the Townshend Acts, we go through about a 3 year period where it's relatively quiet. Nothing's really going on in the colonies. And it seems like we're kind of back on the road to recovery, that we're back to relationship building with Great Britain, because we're working together now. Well, then the 1770s come up, and I refer to the 1770s as the age of bloodshed, because it's right in March of 1770 that the first drops of blood are spilled in this path towards independence, and that's going to be at the Boston Massacre. March of 1770, you have a skirmish between Boston citizens and a squad of British troops. Now, people in Boston, and a lot of people throughout the colonies, are upset because there are a lot of English soldiers who are in the colonies. And most people felt at the time that there was no need for a standing army in times of peace. And so they're wondering, why are the British leaving these troops here? I mean, if they want to protect us in the frontier, they should be out on the frontier. Why are they in our towns? Why are they in our villages? And so you're going to see this adversarial relationship between the soldiers and the colonists, especially in Boston. And so this is going to lead to the Boston Massacre, where 5 people are going to be killed by British troops. The very first person killed is going to be Crispus Attucks. He's a freed African American, and he's going to be killed in the Boston Massacre. And then Paul Revere is going to cut up or create this engraving and send it out to all of the colonial newspapers to have them printed up. And there was a whole bunch of propaganda just within the picture itself. But the idea was that Revere and the Sons of Liberty, remember, he was a member of the Sons of Liberty, they wanted to get the word out that the British were being aggressive towards the colonists. He didn't tell the story about how the colonists were antagonizing the British soldiers. He didn't tell them how they were there with clubs and with, ice balls with rocks and shells in them that were cutting them up and stuff like that. He didn't tell them about how technically they started the attack first. What they printed and what they put out was that the English soldiers attacked innocent Bostonian citizens. And we can't stand for this. Well, what's going to happen next is the trial. And John Adams, the cousin of Samuel Adams, also a member of the Sons of Liberty, is actually going to work to get the British soldiers acquitted of most of the crimes. The most serious crimes, they were acquitted. And then we get a little bit quiet for a while, and then 1773 comes along. And in 1773, Parliament passes the Tea Act. And the Tea Act basically was this. The British West India Tea or Trading Company had tea that it needed to sell, and they wanted to bring it to the colonies. Now, there were a number of members of Parliament who held stock in that company. So Parliament voted that that would be the only tea that would be available in the colonies for sale. That's what the Tea Act was. The Tea Act set up a monopoly on the British West India Trading Company's tea. That's the only tea you can buy and sell in the British colonies. Well, I mean, the funny part of the story is this was really good tea, and they were actually selling it for cheaper than the tea that the colonists already had. But the colonists by this point were so worked up about Britain trying to, force themselves on them and change their rules and taking away salutary neglect and all that other stuff. They're like, heck no. We want to keep our crappy tea and we want to pay more for it. And you can't make us buy the good, cheap stuff. And that's what's going to lead to the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party was a protest by the Sons of Liberty who went aboard these ships carrying this tea, and they dumped the tea into Boston Harbor. Well, this is going to start the ball rolling really, really fast, because what's going to happen is what you've done, Sons of Liberty, is you've attacked Parliament where it hurts the most, in their wallet. Because all these guys over in Parliament who held stock in the trading company just lost all that money. And they're like, no, it's one thing to attack our tax collectors, but now you're coming after my money. We're not playing that game. And so Parliament is going to pass the Intolerable Acts. The Intolerable Acts were geared directly at Boston, and it was set up to punish Boston. The idea was we're going to make them pay one way or the other. The Intolerable Acts included 5 parts. The first one was the Boston Port Act. The Boston Port Act basically said this: we're shutting down Boston Harbor. No ships in, no ships out until that tea is paid for. Well, no one's going to pay for it, so the harbor shuts down. Who that hurts the most is the Boston merchants. Remember, in the New England region, one of their primary economic functions is trade. And if they can't get ships out or ships in, then they have nothing to sell or to buy or anything. So it's basically shutting down businesses in Boston. The second part of the Intolerable Acts is going to be the Massachusetts Government Act. The Massachusetts Government Act is basically going to shut down all self-government systems in Massachusetts. And basically saying you can no longer have your town meetings. You can no longer have your legislative meetings. Those have been shut down permanently. So basically took away their self-government that they have had. Think about it. They have had self-government since 1620 with the Mayflower Compact. And now they've shut that down. Part 3 was kind of a slap where there's going to be 2 slaps in the face. This was a light slap in the face. It's called the Administrative Justice Act. And what that said was any British official that is accused of a crime in the colonies, they have to come back to England for their trial. And that alluded to the idea that British officials could not get a fair trial in Boston, which is fascinating because just 3 years earlier, after the Boston Massacre, that's exactly what they got. But now that's not going to happen. The fourth one is the Quartering Act. They're going to send more troops into Boston, and those troops need some place to live. The Quartering Act of the Intolerable Acts is a continuation of another Quartering Act that was passed in maybe that was 1773 too. I can't remember, but there was a previous Quartering Act, and basically says this: residents have to put up the British soldiers. They have to put them in their homes. They have to feed them. They have to take care of them. It's an adopt a soldier program, but you don't get to sign up for it. It's forced on you. And then finally, and this I think is really one of the ones that hurt the most, the fifth and final part of the Intolerable Acts is the Quebec Act. The Quebec Act basically had nothing to do with Boston, but instead with the Quebec region up in New France. This area had come under the control after the Treaty of Paris of 1763. So you have French Canadian citizens, who are now British Canadian citizens with French heritage. And what the Quebec Act did was it basically extended their boundaries, and didn't just extend the boundaries where these people could go, it extended it into the area that had been previously blocked off by the proclamation line of 1763. So they're saying the French can go, or, the former French can go into that territory, but the colonists can't, even though the colonists fought in the war and won, and these French British citizens fought against us, but they get to go use it. It also said that they could have their own form of self-government up there, and that they could have their Roman Catholic religion as well. And for some reason, during this time, Catholicism was seen as a threat to the colonists, and England just approved it just north of their border. So basically, as they're taking all this stuff away, as they're taking all this stuff away from Boston, it's like they're giving it all to Quebec. And so this is going to lead to the First Continental Congress coming together and saying, we got to do something. They're going to draft the Declaration of Rights and Grievances. They're going to send that to the king saying, hey, these are the problems we have. This, we want to fix this and everything. And we're hoping for a peaceful resolution. But at the same time, in the same First Continental Congress, they also passed the Suffolk Resolves and others, and they determined that each colony is going to create its own militia. It's kind of along those lines of hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And so what they're planning is we're going to have, each colony will have its own militia. They're going to start building up their armories and their weaponry and all that other stuff. And that's going to, just in case things go wrong, we'll have that in our back pocket. Andres asked what the Administration of Justice Act was. Andres, that is when they told British officials living in the colonies, if you're accused of a crime, the trial has to take place over in Great Britain. They can't have a trial under colonial supervision. It has to be done over in Great Britain. Afrin, you answered that. Thank you for hitting that for me. Okay, so anyway, so the First Continental Congress, hope for the best, plan for the worst. We know where this is going. All right, 1775. As a result of, the colonial militias building and trying to create, building up their weaponry and their armories and stuff, the British get word of it. They know what's going on. And so the troops stationed in Boston were ordered to march to Lexington and Concord with two intents. The first one is to find the Massachusetts Armory, basically where they're storing all their weapons, and confiscate all those weapons, because if you don't have guns, you can't fight. And two, look for two of the primary leaders of the Sons of Liberty, John Adams John Hancock and Samuel Adams, and arrest them. So they started their little march on their way to Lexington and Concord. This is when Paul Revere, William Dawes, and others make their famous ride to warn the people in the countryside that the British are coming, the British are coming. And when the British get to Lexington, there is militia members of the Massachusetts militia waiting for them. And the first shots of the war are fired. These are referred to as the shot that was heard around the world. The colonists are going to be pushed back. They're going to have to go into a retreat, which will allow the British soldiers to continue to march on to Concord, because they didn't find the armory, they didn't find Hancock or Adams either. So they're continuing on to Concord. But by the time they get there, not Revere, because he had been stopped, but William Dawes and a couple other riders had made it to Concord, and they had a much bigger force waiting for them. And the Battle of Concord takes place. When that happens, now it's the British who are in retreat. The Minutemen of the Massachusetts militia are going to be able to push back the British, and they're going to be hightailing it back to Boston, which is only about 1.5 miles away. But they're being chased by the militiamen. And what was funny is the British are retreating on the road heading back to Boston, and the militiamen are like in the woods along the road, just firing shots over their heads and stuff, and just trying to rattle them all the way back. Now, this is the first battle of the American Revolution, but war has still not been declared yet, okay? We're still not officially at war. when this happens, the Second Continental Congress is going to meet in Philadelphia, and they're going to come together. Yes. Yeah. The stream, yeah. The stream, when I'm all done, it'll stay on my YouTube channel, and you'll be able to find it. Not 100% sure it uses the same link, though, so you just go to my YouTube channel, and you'll be able to find it. But anyway, so 1775, the Second Continental Congress is going to come together, and they are going to start drafting, different ideas for how to maintain peace. One of those ideas is the Olive Branch Petition. This is the last-ditch effort of the colonists to try to maintain peace with Great Britain. Because through all of this, guys, they still wanted to maintain peace with Great Britain. If you remember correctly, I talked about it in one of my teaching videos, and I've talked about it other places. Only less than 30%, about 1/3 of the colonies, that's about 33%, but 1/3 of the colonists supported the fight for independence. Another third said, no, we're loyal to Great Britain. And 40% of the population living in the colonies could care less. Because the way they figured it, it doesn't matter who's in charge. I still got to get up and pick the potatoes tomorrow morning. It's not going to affect me directly. So really, you have over 70% of the population of the colonies who really have no desire or could care less about going to war and getting independence from Great Britain. When the Olive Branch Petition is sent to King George III, while it's in transit, I guess, basically what happens is Bunker Hill, the Battle of Bunker Hill. This is a major victory for Great Britain, but it's also a major loss. Because though Great Britain won that battle, the colonists inflict such damage to their troops as far as casualties, that when word got back to King George, he absolutely denied the Olive Branch Petition, and he drafted his own declaration of causes for taking up arms against the colonies. It was Great Britain who declared war on the colonies. It wasn't the other way around. The colonies were, the colonies were doing a lot of stuff to trigger this, but it was Great Britain who declared war on the colonies. This is what leads to the drafting of the Declaration of Independence. In 1775, when the Second Continental Congress first got together, I guess it was an outside chance that they might have to do this, but, it wasn't at the forefront of their plans. You did have people like Thomas Paine in January of 1776 publishing Common Sense, calling for independence at that point. But when the king goes ahead and declares war, that's when the Second Continental Congress is going to say, we need to put together a committee to come up with a declaration for independence. And I was talking to someone today in class, and just to remind you guys, the Declaration of Independence was written for the colonies. It wasn't written for King George and England. It wasn't our declaration of war. It was our declaration to all the population of the colonies that we are declaring our independence from Great Britain. And when you look at the Declaration of Independence, it's got three main parts. It's got the introduction, where Thomas Jefferson introduces the reasons why we're declaring independence, and it has a lot to do with his belief in John Locke and our natural rights and the responsibility of governments to protect its people. And when they fail to do that, the people have the right to leave that government, because remember, under, all the Enlightenment thinking and everything, government gets its power from the people. And if the people feel like the government is not doing what it's supposed to do, they can withdraw their consent. And that's what Jefferson lays out in that first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. The majority of the Declaration of Independence just goes line by line by line as to why they are declaring independence. And it talks about taxes. It talks about the troops being there. It just talks, all of that stuff. And then finally, the last paragraph is the actual declaration. And Andrew asked what caused Bunker Hill. It was just a battle. I mean, once Lexington and Concord happened, the colonists, are feeling, I guess they're feeling their oats. They're feeling stronger. And they think, well, maybe we can push the British completely out of Boston. And so that's going to lead to that battle at Bunker Hill. It was one of those things where tactically, though, the British had the high ground. They're up on a hill. It's very difficult to take a hill. That's why you hear that in like all the war movies and stuff like that. If you're able to take a hill, that's a huge victory in battle. But that's basically what was going on there. It was just, the colonists trying to push the Great Britain or the British soldiers out of Boston. So we're back to the Declaration. I should point out that while the Declaration of Independence is a letter to the colonists, of why we're declaring independence, this is the actual motion for independence was made by Richard Henry Lee. It was Lee's resolution. And in his resolution that was passed by the Second Continental Congress, he said, we want to declare our independence. There's three parts to it. We're going to declare our independence. We're going to set up trade relationships with foreign countries, and we want to find allies because we're going to war and we're going to need help. Once Lee's resolution passed, that's when they draft the Declaration of Independence. Okay? All right. Guys, I keep getting notifications, not you, that my chat keeps getting disconnected, but then it reconnects again. So if you're having trouble putting stuff in, just keep trying because it will go through. All right, moving on. We're at war now. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail about the war, and you really don't either. The major battles you need to know, probably, we already talked about Lexington, Concord, and Bunker Hill. The next big one is going to be the Battle of Saratoga. This is going to happen in upstate New York, and this is going to be a key battle because what happens after we actually win this battle is that the French decide to join or ally themselves with us, and they bring Spain with them. And with the joining of France and Spain with the United States, that's going to give us the boost we need. I mean, we don't win the war overnight. I mean, the Battle of Saratoga was in 1777, and the French joined us in 1778, and then the war doesn't end until like 1781. So I mean, we still got some work to do. But if we didn't have the French, we probably wouldn't have made it out of 1777. Because the Continental Congress was losing money. They weren't able to pay. George Washington's dealing with a lot of desertions from soldiers who are like, oh, I'm just going back to the farm. It's just not worth it and stuff like that. So the Battle of Saratoga is seen as a major, major turning point in the American Revolution. The next big battle you need to know is the Battle of Yorktown. That's going to be the battle that brings everything to an end when the British surrender to the Americans. Now, the Battle of Yorktown happens in 1781, but the Treaty of Paris, and I'm going to throw out the year, of 1783 is not signed until 1783. But when that treaty is signed, Great Britain is going to recognize American independence. We are going to take all the land that Great Britain held, going north to Canada, going south to Florida, and going west all the way to the Mississippi. So America, basically, that's, you can see it on that little map down there at the bottom. It's the green area on the map. That's what we got from the Treaty of Paris of 1783. Now, what's interesting, and this is going to come into play later, and not just in this period, but in the next time period as well, is Great Britain also agreed to leave that area. So that green area, Great Britain had inhabited a lot of forts in that western part of it, and they agreed to leave after the Treaty of Paris of 1783 was signed, but they don't. So this is going to be a problem that we have to deal with for a while. It's going to be like Great Britain is hanging out, trying to maybe look for their way back in to get the colonies back in line. So just, stick that one in your back pocket because it's going to come back around. That takes us to the 1780s and the 1800. And the first thing we're going to deal with, this is known as the Age of the Republic. The first thing we're going to deal with is the Articles of Confederation. This was the official government of the United States from about I think it was ratified in 1781. From 1781 to 1787, this is going to be the official government of the United States. But as you know, it just didn't work. It had too weak of a central government. The key phrase I always use, and I stole it from Hip Hughes history, and I'll admit it right here, but the Articles of Confederation sucked because the Fed was too weak. Our federal government didn't have much power to do anything. In fact, They didn't have we didn't have an executive branch. All we had was a legislative branch. So there was no executive branch, no president. There was no judicial branch. So if there was conflicts between the states or anything like that, no one could deal with it. We didn't have any courts to deal with that. And there was no national supremacy. Basically, the Articles of Confederation set up, when we refer to a confederation, we're talking about a loose organization set up primarily for the defense of the region. So basically, all 13 states agreed, yeah, we're in this together. If we get attacked, we'll all work together. But we're still 13 independent states. And if you look at the Treaty of Paris of 1783, it actually lists each individual state in that treaty. It doesn't say it says the United States of America, including, and then it lists all the states. So each state was seen almost as its own independent entity. The problem is that, what the power that the Articles did have is they had the power to negotiate treaties, because that's good. We need to negotiate the Treaty of Paris. Congress could declare war, which is good as well. They could raise an army, also pretty good, but they couldn't pay for it. See, they didn't have the power to tax. And if you don't have the power to tax, you can't pay for anything you want to do as a government. So if we go to war and the federal government orders an army to be, called up, that's fantastic. But when that army gets there, they're going to want to get paid. And if you're not paying soldiers, just like any other job, they're going to leave. So without that power to tax, the federal government really did not have, much power at all. All the individual states had power to tax, and all the individual states had power to negotiate, treaties as well. So you could see where the weaknesses lied in the Articles of Confederation. When it really came to a head was with Shays' Rebellion in 1786. Daniel Shays was a former American soldier. When he came home, he owed a lot of money on his farm. And they were calling in the debt. And they said, we're going to foreclose on your farm if you don't pay our debt. And so Daniel Shays said, well, I'm going to get paid for my time in the service. But he never did. And so what's going to happen is Daniel Shays is going to lead a rebellion of former soldiers, and they're literally going to go down to the courthouse there in Western Massachusetts, take it over, and say, we're going to, the way you stop foreclosures, just shut down the courthouse. And if they can't have trials, or they can't have, hearings, they can't put out foreclosures. Well, Massachusetts is going to call for help from the federal government. The federal government is going to be like, well, we'd love to help, but we don't have an army because we can't pay for an army, so you're kind of on your own. And Massachusetts ends up having to pay a private army to come put down the rebellion. Well, what this showed us was that the Articles of Confederation sucked because the Fed was just too weak. And so that's when they determined, let's meet at Annapolis. And they had the Annapolis Convention later in 1786. The idea of the Annapolis Convention was to take a look at the Articles of Confederation and see what could be fixed. Well, only like 5 states showed up. And if you remember correctly, in order to change the Articles of Confederation, to amend them, you needed unanimous support. Well, if only 5 of the 13 states show up, you ain't going to get unanimous support. So they agreed, we're going to meet in Philadelphia 1 year from now at the Constitutional Convention, and all states are going to be invited. And I apologize, I don't have a slide for the Constitutional Convention, so I'm just going to talk through it. So here we go. When they met for the Constitutional Convention, the idea was to fix the Articles of Confederation, but they couldn't. There was just too many problems with it. So instead, they decided just to basically, in fact, I'll make you just look at me. How's that? So they basically just decided, we're going to trash the Articles of Confederation, throw them out, start all over again. And that's how we got to the Constitution. The big question on the table was, how do we determine representation for each state? Under the Articles, each state had 1 representative. It was equal representation. Well, the larger states are saying we need more because we represent more people. But the smaller states say, yeah, but if you have more representatives, we'll never be heard. So you have 2 different plans come up. You have the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. The Virginia plan is going to be introduced by James Madison, and it's basically a 2-house government, a bicameral legislature, and both houses representation will be based on population. Well, the small states are like, well, what is that going to do for me? That does nothing. And so William Patterson is going to come up with what's known as the New Jersey Plan. The New Jersey Plan was set up as a equal representation, where just like they had under the Articles of Confederation, 13 representatives, one representing each state. And the large states are like, whoa, wait a minute. No, that takes us right back to where we were. Here comes Roger Sherman. Roger Sherman's going to introduce the Connecticut Plan, and the Connecticut Plan basically combined the two. And what we see happen is under the Connecticut Plan, also known as the Great Compromise, we're going to have a House of Representatives that representation will be based on population. And we'll have a Senate where representation will be equal, 2 senators per state. You have 2 houses, the bicameral legislature, and you need both houses to pass laws. So one can't have all the power. So they each have equal power. They just have different rules for representation. Once they got that in place, then the question became like, well, who counts for representation? And the southern states were just like, well, we got all these slaves down here and we need more power in the legislature. So why don't we count the slaves towards our population? And the northern states are like, wait a minute, if we count all your slaves, that's going to increase your power in the House of Representatives. And that's what the debate is about. The debate is not about slavery. The debate is about power in Congress. So that's when they came up with the 3/5 compromise, where they determined that they would take the total slave population for each state, and 3/5 of that, or 60%, will count towards total population of that state. And then they'll base representation on that. So that's what the 3/5 compromise was. The other side of the 3/5 compromise is the northern states, they're like, well, we kind of see a problem with that because, you can kind of, I don't know, I'm drawing a blank on the phraseology, but you can kind of sweeten the pot because the more slaves you have, your number of representatives will keep going up and up and up. Well, that's when they passed the end date for the Atlantic slave trade having coming into the United States. They basically said this. They said the United States will only participate in the international slave trade for 20 more years. So in 1808, we're going to end our participation in the international slave trade. And so that was kind of like the compromise there with that 3/5. Never mind that most of Europe had already cut back on the international slave trade. I mean, we were kind of slow to come into the party, but that's what the 3/5 compromise was all about. So there you go. We have the legislative branch set up. But other weaknesses of the articles: no executive, no judicial. So we got to create those branches too. Article 1 of the Constitution created that legislative branch. Article 2 is going to create the executive branch. That's the presidency. And we're going to have an executive branch that has the executive powers of overseeing our country. And the president will also have the power to negotiate treaties. The president will have the power, he'll be the commander in chief and stuff like that. And the president will be elected through the means of an electoral college. The purpose of the Electoral College was to make sure that the minority is heard as loudly as the majority. And so it's kind of like along the same lines of why they did a House and a Senate. So small states and big states will both be heard. The Electoral College was set up where every state's electoral votes would equal the number of representatives they have in the House and the number of senators they have. So if they have 10 representatives in the House of Representatives and there are 2 senators, they would have 12 electoral votes. So that was set up. The third branch that's going to be set up is the judicial branch. The judicial branch is the only branch of government in which those who serve for life. It's a permanent structure. And that's Hamilton talked about that, where that is it'll be like kind of a safe thing, that it's not going to be like if justices are appointed by they're appointed by presidents, they're confirmed by the Senate, but if they serve a life term, that means that they're not beholden politically to anybody. It's not going to be a situation in which President Lennox appoints you to be the justice on a Supreme Court, but as long as I'm president, you have your job. But when I leave, you're more than likely you're not going to keep your job. So, and I can fire you anytime I want. So you better make rulings the way I want you to. No, When a Supreme Court justice is appointed, it's for life. So the only thing that they are supposed to serve is the Constitution, and it's going to be determined. It's not even in this time period we're studying, but I'll just tell you right now. There's going to be a Supreme Court case called Marbury v. Madison, and that's going to determine that the Supreme Court has the power to interpret the law, and that's their job, is to hold up a law and hold up the Constitution and make sure they match. And if they don't, they got to throw out the law. It's the only permanent, branch of our government. Okay. So once all that's hashed out, then they got to get the Constitution ratified. That's going to lead to the Federalist, anti-Federalist debate. If you're a Federalist, you support the Constitution. If you're an anti-Federalist, you really don't want to change it. And so you're going to go back and forth with all these different things. The big thing that comes out of this debate is going to be the Federalist Papers, which are written by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison. And they are going to draft 66 different essays supporting the passage of the Constitution. You might want to be familiar with Federalist 10 and Federalist 51. Just look up the main ideas of those two pieces of the Federalist essays, Federalist 10 and Federalist 51. The Constitution is going to be ratified based on a negotiation between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists agree to add a Bill of Rights to the Constitution if the Anti-Federalists agree to accept the Constitution, and that's what happens. So the Constitution is ratified in 1789 is when we have enough votes to ratify it, and by 1791, all the states have ratified it, and also in 1791, we add the Bill of Rights. And those are the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution that primarily deal with individual rights. Once we have the ratification of the Constitution, well, we got to elect a president. And that's going to take us into Washington's administration. Hey, one thing I want to point out, I guess I did have a slide. Who knew? Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were not at the Constitutional Convention. Time and time again, I have students telling me how John Adams and Thomas Jefferson argued and wrote the Constitution. It didn't happen. They weren't there. Adams was in England. Jefferson was in France. You got to remember that, okay? All right. That's going to take us into the presidency of George Washington. And wow, this is taking longer than I thought. So, presidency of George Washington. Basically, the domestic policy, what you should be familiar with, obviously, is Hamilton's financial plan. Hamilton is tasked with dealing with this monumental debt that the United States has. He comes up with a plan that includes combining all the states' debts into one bucket, and then, refinancing that basically. He's going to put all the debt in one bucket, both state debt and federal debt, and he's going to reissue bonds for that debt. He's refinancing it is what he's doing. And what he's saying to everyone we owe money to is that what we're going to do is we're going to pay you back, but not right now. But we're going to pay you back with a higher interest rate. And for right now, what we'll do is we'll make interest payments to you regularly, so you know you're going to get your money. It has two real good effects of that. The first one is we don't have someone breathing down our necks saying, "Give us our money." The other thing it does is it builds credit, and that's what Hamilton is trying to do. In the meantime, he's going to find ways to raise government revenue or make money for the government. He's going to do that through a series of taxes. He's going to use the tariffs, which are going to be taxes on all imports coming into the United States, and he's going to do it with a direct progressive tax called the whiskey tax. And these tax dollars are going to start raising the money that the government has that they'll be able to use to start paying off some of that debt. He's also going to create a national bank. And the bank, what that's going to do is that's going to be where we keep all our money. And if we have money in a bank, that means we can loan money out. And if we can loan money out, when it's paid back to us, we get paid interest. So now we have a third revenue source. So we have tariffs, we have the progressive whiskey tax, and we have interest in the national bank. And this was his plan to, basically build the economy of the United States. And it was really smart, actually. But people like Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State, had a big problem with it. Jefferson's problem is especially with the national bank. because he says the national bank is not directly in the U.S. Constitution. And this is where we get into a debate about the interpretation. How do we interpret the Constitution? Do we interpret it loosely, where we try to figure out the intent of the document, where, yeah, there's not a bank in there, but we do have Article 1, Section 8, that very last paragraph where it talks about Congress being able to do anything necessary and proper. Well, a bank is necessary and proper, so that they called it the, quote, elastic clause. It's in there, so the bank is in there. And Jefferson's going to come back, who interprets it strictly and says, not in there, not constitutional. And so we have this debate on how to, interpret the Constitution. We're at an impasse. Hamilton needs to get his economic plan passed. Jefferson and Madison at this point, who is also a strict interpretationist, say, no, we're not going to, we don't agree. They come to a compromise. You got to understand, our country is built on compromises. The compromise was this. Jefferson and Madison would support the financial plan of Alexander Hamilton if Alexander Hamilton would support the movement of the nation's capital to Virginia, basically putting the capital in the South. Quickly, the southern states were nervous about the capital being so far north because Hamilton, as what we're going to call a federalist, believes that our country's economics is going to grow on the merchant class. And if the capital is up there in the middle New England region, that's where the merchant class lives, and they're going to be, focused on them and not on what the South needs. So let's move the capital down to the South so, basically everyone gets heard. This is when we see the beginnings of political parties. You're going to have the Federalist under Hamilton. Now, keep in mind, the Federalist under Hamilton, the political party is not the same as the Federalist who wrote, who supported the ratification of the Constitution. All right, that's a completely different topic. Now we're talking about more political ideologies. The Federalists who supported the Constitution, they believed in a federal government. That's what they were pushing for, a stronger federal government. The Federalist Party believes in a whole lot more. It's not just about a strong central government, but it's about the economic basis of our country. It's about what the focus of our country should be. So you have the Federalists on one side, and you have the Democratic Republicans on the other, led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. All right, so make sure you know the difference between those two political parties. Moving forward, the Constitution is going to be challenged almost right away based on Hamilton's financial plan by the Whiskey Rebellion. The Whiskey Rebellion is going to be very similar to other rebellions we've seen, Bacon's Rebellion, Shays' Rebellion. It's about a tax. They don't like the whiskey tax, and they're actually saying, hey, no taxation without representation. Truth be told, they did have representation. They just didn't want to pay the tax because whiskey was it's basically like a currency in the Western frontier. If you didn't have cash, you could pay with whiskey. And so that tax was really cutting into it. So you're going to have farmers in Western Pennsylvania rebel against the whiskey tax. Well, just like Shays' Rebellion, they're going to rise up and they're going to form their own army and they're going to march on the local government and stuff there. But here's the difference. The federal government has the power to raise an army, and they have the power to tax an army. So President George Washington calls on Congress to raise the army, and they do. And they send 13,000 troops into the Western Pennsylvania, and they put the rebellion down. The value of the Whiskey Rebellion is we finally see that the Constitution works, and it's going to continue on. It's going to become the supreme law of our land. All right? That's domestic policy. Foreign policy for Washington, he had to deal with a new revolution going on in the world, and that's going to be the French Revolution that started the same year he was elected, 1789. And again, you're going to have the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans in his ears just chirping at him, saying we need to support one side or the other. Jefferson was really pushing for the support of the French. Hamilton is really pushing for the support of the English in the war because the French Revolution grows into this war in Europe between England and France. And America does not want to get involved. In fact, what Washington is going to say is we're not taking either side, and he drafted the Proclamation of Neutrality. And that Proclamation of Neutrality, the idea that America is going to stay out of the drama of the rest of the world, is going to be in play for the next 120 years. I mean, this is Washington's legacy right here. So the Proclamation of Neutrality is pretty big. They also negotiate 2 treaties during this time. The first one is Jay's Treaty. Jay's Treaty is negotiated with Great Britain. And remember how I told you Great Britain promised to leave the western frontier after the Treaty of Paris of 1783 was signed, and they didn't leave? Well, this treaty is negotiating them leaving now. And what John Jay does is he negotiates and says, hey, if you guys leave, what we're going to do is we're going to give you most favored nation trading status, which means Great Britain, you're our number one best friend with regards to trade. Well, this is going to tick off a lot of people. A lot of people in America are upset with that because we're still remembering we just got out of this war with Great Britain and now they're our most favored nation. But the argument is, yeah, but they're going to leave the forts in the West and we're going to finally rid them out of our land. But we're not. They're going to stay, and we'll deal with that in the next time period. The other treaty we're going to negotiate is Pinckney's Treaty. Spain had control of France and Louisiana, or specifically New Orleans. And they also had control of the Louisiana Territory. We needed access to the Mississippi River. We needed access to New Orleans. So we negotiated this treaty, Pinckney's Treaty, which basically said that we have free access to the Mississippi River, and we have what's called right of deposit in New Orleans. New Orleans opens up the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico, and it also opens up the Mississippi from the Gulf of Mexico. Very important to our farmers for trade. And right of deposit allows our ships to go into the port of New Orleans and pick up goods and drop off goods to be traded and stuff like that. So that was Pinckney's Treaty. That one was met with a lot of support and stuff like that. Washington's going to serve out 8 years. After 8 years, he is going to, like I talked about yesterday, the American Cincinnatus, he's going to lay down his power and he's going to go back to Mount Vernon. That's going to lead us into the next presidency, and that is the presidency of John Adams. Poor John Adams. I refer to his presidency as the good, the bad, and the sad. Let's talk about the good first. He is going to pick up where Washington left off. We have this problem with France. They're trying to get us to help. Now, I didn't mention it, but there was the whole thing with Citizen Genet and all that other stuff while Washington was president, where we kicked Genet out and said, you're a bad influence on our people and stuff like that. And we're having trouble with the French stopping our ships trying to get to England. Most favored nation trading, all that other stuff. So Adams is going to send officials to France to negotiate peace with them, saying, hey, we want to trade with everybody. We have the Proclamation of Neutrality. When our officials get there, they're met by Talleyrand, and Talleyrand's basically going to say, yeah, you can meet with our top guys, but you got to pay us first. And he demands a bribe, and he demands that the United States loan France money. And unless they agree to that, we're not talking to anybody. We're not negotiating any peace. It's known as the XYZ affair. Well, our officials said, no, talk to the hand, we're out of here. Goes back to the United States. The American people hear about it. They're ticked off about it. John Adams is ticked off. He's like, I'm not going to give 1 cent of tribute. I'd rather go to war. And he does. And that's the beginning of the quasi-war, that undeclared naval war that we had with France for almost 2 years. Now, during that time, Adams and the Congress are worried about French infiltration into our country. And they're worried about French spies coming in and trying to turn the tide of the American opinion towards France and stuff like that. So this is when they passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. This is the bad of Adams' presidency. The Alien Act is going to set new terms for immigrants coming into our country, saying instead of having to live here 5 years, you have to live here for 12 years before you can become a citizen. If the executive branch feels like you're a threat to our national security, the president can kick you out of here. Those are the Alien Acts. The Sedition Acts, this is the bad one, because the Alien Acts, quite honestly, those were absolutely constitutional. Congress had every right to make those laws. The Sedition Act is going to be in question because that's where they made it illegal for anyone to speak negatively about our government in print or, at protests or anything like that. So basically taking away the freedom of speech and the freedom of the press. This is all going to be in play. The Sedition Act is going to be in play, I think, until, I don't know the exact date in March. I want to say March 4th, 1801, which just so happened to be Inauguration Day. So basically, Adams and the Congress said, throughout the rest of this term, my presidency, you can't say anything bad about me or you're going to go to jail. It's a violation of, obviously, the First Amendment. But what we're going to find, what's interesting, guys, is when we get into World War I and later, there's going to be several times under national security where other sedition acts are going to be passed. This is not the last time we hear about a sedition act. The real sad part of Adams' presidency is when he loses the election to Thomas Jefferson. It's known as the Revolution of 1800. But before he leaves, what he does, and I don't even think I talked about this in my videos. I'll talk about it more in the next unit. But he passes what's known as the Midnight Judges. They basically create 16 new judicial seats throughout the country where they can put Federalist judges. And that way, because what happens is when John Adams loses the presidency, not only do the Federalists lose the presidency, they also lose the House and the Senate. So it's going to be all Democratic Republicans. So Adams is going to make this move to have more Federalists on the courts. And so it's known as the Midnight Judges. But like I said, I don't think I talked about that in my teaching video, and I'm not even 100% sure if it's on this exam. So I'll just throw that in there. Okay? So basically, that's it. That's the entire time period, and I did it just a little bit over an hour. I haven't seen any questions come in. I've been seeing my chat pop in and out. If you guys have questions, now would be the time to start typing them in there. If they're not coming up in the chat, if you're in my class, feel free. You can text message me and via Remind, and I can answer them that way. But I don't have anything else to say. So you just tell me if there's anything else you want me to talk about, and I'll be happy to do it. All right? So I'm going to sit here for a minute, relax, my nose itches, I'm sorry about that, and just see what we have coming through. Let me look at my chat here and see if I can... Nope, that's not going to do it. So, looks like I got about 41 of you who are still listening to me, so that's pretty good. So, I'm trying to kill this lag time. So, basically, I'm not seeing any questions come in. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, as far as the test tomorrow. There is one thing I didn't talk about. I didn't talk about Republican motherhood. I can't believe I keep forgetting to talk about Republican motherhood. That's one thing you need to know. We're going to, I got a text message. I'll get that here in just, Andres, I got it. I'll give you here in just a second. Abigail Adams is probably the leading woman during this time period as far as, who we know and stuff like that, had tremendous influence. She is going to give a famous, she's going to write a letter to her husband where she famously tells him to, basically, I'm sorry, what's that? I hope the year is going great for WAP. What do you mean WAP? Saul, come on. WAP, this is APUSH, you know that. Anyway, gosh, I totally lost my train of thought. So anyway, Abigail Adams, it's to remember the ladies. A letter she writes to her husband while they're drafting the Declaration of Independence. She goes, please remember the ladies. Make sure that, the men are treating them better and stuff. And I said this in class and I want to say it again. She's not looking necessarily for political rights. The whole idea is about, education for women, about Republican motherhood, the idea that, it's going to be the women who spread the idea of republicanism to the country. They're going to educate the children and teach the children how to be good citizens. And so what she's looking for is the opportunity for women to be educated. She's looking for the opportunity for women to be heard, but not necessarily get political rights. Okay? It's not like women, were being mistreated, I guess, as far as colonial times. Maybe in today's times you'd say, yeah, they were, but in colonial times, but they did want to be educated. And that's going to be very important because Republican motherhood is going to be that conveyor of republicanism to get the Americans, the youth to understand the value of our country and what we do. My glasses. Oh, you want to see the dog? Not Finn, it's Flynn. Everyone calls him Finn. I don't know where. I know there's Finn from what was that TV show? Glee and stuff. You want to get up here? Can you get up here? Come here. Come on. He wants to get up here. Come on. Get up. Come on. He's getting old. He turned 7 yesterday, and there you go, Harley. It's all good. He turned 7. His hips are bothering him a little bit, so he doesn't jump up as much as he can. But maybe I can get him up here. Come on. You don't want to get up here. What if we'll try? We're not done yet. If you guys have any more, oh wait, Andres, you had a question. I'm sorry. I got several questions. Let me get to them. Okay, Andres, how many questions are on the test? There's 27 questions and 1 short answer. You're doing them all tomorrow, guys. When you get to my class, bottom line, as soon as you log into Zoom, you'll be able to go right to the test. So don't wait to pass go. Don't ask to collect $200. Just log in, turn on your camera, start working on the test. Okay. Any big ideas to remember for the test tomorrow? Pretty much everything I said tonight. I mean, big ideas. I mean, know the reasons for the revolution. Know the reasons for the Constitution. What was wrong with the Articles of Confederation, and how did they fix them? What were some big moments in, Washington's presidency, Adams' presidency? I mean, I don't want to, I can go into all the details, but look at the, causes for the revolution, what big events happened in the revolution, and then just look at it that way. Okay? A couple more here. George Grenville. I'm going to have to look that one up, Haley, because I'm drawing a blank on him. So let me look. I'm going to cheat. It's 8:40 on a Thursday night. Grenville was a tax plan. I know that. He was basically he was the prime minister from Great Britain. He in the 1760s he's the one who started initiating that the taxes and stuff like that. So I think one of the things you had on there was the Treaty of Grenville. I think that was on. Don't worry about that for the test tomorrow. That's just extra stuff that you don't need to know. Okay. I'm not going to tell you what the writing question is, Andres. I'm not going to give you the question. All right, thanks, Tristan. I appreciate that. All right, let's see. Okay, Susan's asking if there's any periods during this unit you would want us to study in detail on. I need to look here. Let me look. Let me go through the timeline. I'll give you some. I mean, obviously, I think the Constitution is going to be big. I think, you don't have to necessarily know every single tax that was passed. I mean, you don't need to know those minor details, but know why the taxation was going on, what the response to the taxation was, stuff like that. I'm just thinking, Constitution, with regards to Washington's presidency, how he handled different things as far as, the Neutrality Proclamation. I didn't talk about his farewell address where he warned us not to get involved in any foreign drama, or not to have debt, or not to have political parties. Basically everything we did, he warned us not to do. Those are the big things, like I said, there's not a whole lot of the details as far as, this tax and that tax and, and this battle and that battle. But, we were, the American, or, the Albany plan, they tried to unify us to, in order to protect us from, the French, or from the Native Americans and the French. And that planted a seed for unification. The proclamation line of 1763 and the Treaty of Paris of 1763 started us on the road to revolution, because that was followed by the end of salutary neglect and taxation. We protested the taxes. They were removed, and then more taxes came, and then the intolerable acts came, and that really just kind of set us on the line. We tried to maintain peace with the Olive Branch Petition and stuff, but that didn't work, so we had the Declaration of Independence, and then we fought the war. Those kind of things. Just, know the big flow of history as you go through those timelines I guess that's my best suggestion for you. Oh, what I said was, Mallory asked if you need to know a specific article or amendment. I said with the Federalist Papers, I would recommend Federalist 10 and Federalist 51. Federalist 51 is about checks and balances. That's the kind of stuff I want you to know. And generally, within our key concepts, they talk about the Federalist Papers, and they talk about Federalist 10, and they talk about Federalist 51. So if you just know the big ideas, what they stand for, you don't need to know the intimate details. So basically, they're both about our, getting the Constitution, but like Federalist 10 was why we needed the Constitution, and like Federalist 51 is, about checks and balances and why that's so important in our government. Nicole asks, is the test all the multiple choice are all stimulus? And basically, guys, all of our tests are going to have stimulus-based multiple choice. I'll never give you knowledge-based multiple choice on the exam because that's not what we do in AP. We do stimulus-based, and like those of you guys in sports and everything like that, you practice how you play. And so that's how I look at it. We practice the stimulus throughout the year, so when it comes time to take the exam, we knock it out of the park. Let's see. I'm trying to get Flynn after, and I promise I am. Come here, buddy. Can you get up here? Can you come here? Come here. Come here, sweetheart. Oh, come here. Hey, come here. Get up here. Come here. Come here. Come here. You won't get up. I don't understand. All right. We got another one here. All right. Anything you need to know for the written portion. Basically, I'm not going to go into the detail on the written portion. Just a lot of, and a lot of the stuff I've already talked about. Just think big ideas. Because remember, the short answer is typically, basically, it gives you the opportunity to show off what you know. And remember, when you're writing that SAQ, guys, put details in there. Remember, use ACE. Answer the question, cite evidence, and then explain that evidence. All right, that's so important, that especially that explanation point. But name names, name events. If it's asking you about causes of the revolution, talk about some of the different taxes. If it asks you about the structure of the Constitution, talk about the Virginia and the New Jersey plan. If it asks you about Washington's domestic policy, talk about Hamilton's financial plan. But those are that's where details really come in. So that's my recommendation. So, if I could, I would sit there and say, okay, guys, this is what the question is on, but I can't do that because that's just not right. You would love it, but that would, So like I said, big ideas, French-Indian War, the road to revolution, the fight for independence, the American Revolution, the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, Washington's presidency, Adams' presidency. Get a key points from each one of those sections. You don't need like a dictionary on each one, but maybe take those big ideas and 4 or 5 bullet points under each one of items you want to remember in case that's the question on the exam. Okay? All right. Any other questions, guys? Will you please come here and jump up and give them good luck? Come here. Come here. Elsie. He's here. He's right here by me, so that counts for luck, right? Come here. Get up here. Right. I'm going to try. I'm going to try to pick him up. Come here. Can you come here? Come here. Oh. Come here. Oh. There he is. All right. Can you see him? There he is. That's my boy. All right. There's Flynn. Here he is. Let's put the corner down. There. Can you wave? See, wave? Ah, he's got his duck. All right, there's your good luck, boys. Boys and girls, here he is right here. Man, this is the 5 dog right here. All right, he's my baby. All right, guys, and Flynn or Gilligan's jealous, but he won't come over here. All right, no other questions, guys? I got the Gucci Bolo on the background. We're down 14-7, which is not too bad. We can still come back. All right, no other questions, guys. I'm gonna give you a 2-minute warning here. Oh, wait. Oh, no. I already answered these. Okay. I think that's it. You saw Flynn. You're good to go. I know, Afrin. That's pretty much my life right there. I could have the worst day in the world, and as soon as I walk in the door, he's always right there waiting for me, and everything's perfect from that point on. So, all right. Anything else, guys? All right. Well, you guys are going to do great. I think you're going to find this test going into it. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to say it's easy, but I think you know what to expect now. I think you have a better understanding, because I think it's a little bit easier in the understanding because we've talked about the Revolutionary, War before, and so I think you guys are going to do fantastic, and I look forward to seeing how good you guys do. I always get excited for tests, not because I like, I know tests suck. But I love seeing how good you guys do. And I have absolute faith that you guys are going to do awesome tomorrow. So don't do this all night study and everything. Get a good night's sleep and everything like that. And we will see you tomorrow. There you go, Saul. This was one of my best students last year. This guy is awesome. So, he knows. All right, guys. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great evening. Man, go watch the end of the game. Cheer the Cougars on. We'll see you next time. All right? Bye-bye.